At the Ohio Department of Agriculture on Thursday, ODA held a 2011 planting season assessment meeting. They're assessing the impact to Ohio farmers from this spring's wet weather and to make sure Ohio farmers and agribusinesses are updated on all available resources for assistance. One of the speakers was the Ohio State University agricultural economist Barry Ward, talking about the economic considerations and options for farmers.
One of the things that we've done that I did this last winter was ask producers in the course of our policy and outlook meetings, have they ever recalled a period of time in their lifetime that we've had economic profitability in the crop production sector as we've seen in the last 4 years. You know, I didn't get very many like periods shouted out. One of the periods that was mentioned was the mid-1970s when we had some good profitability. And the other one was one of my colleagues, Carl Zuloff, who some of you know, mentioned just after World War II. And I don't think he really remembers that period, but he's done a lot of history. And so I guess that's one of the positives coming into this kind of dreadful planting season, is we've had, at least in most of the states, most of Ohio, we've had a fairly decent prospects for profitability the last 4 years. That's showing up in balance sheets for most of our farmers, maybe not livestock producers, but some of our crop producers in the state of Ohio, is that we're coming into this period, this year, relatively strong and strengthened in terms of our financial standing. So, and I know one of the NASS reports that I've just recently read indicates that at least 2011, the forecast was the second highest inflation-adjusted value for net farm income coming into this year. That was the prediction. The top 5 earning years for the past 3 decades have occurred since 2004. So this past 4 or 5 year period, at least the potential has been there for producers to gain some strength in their balance sheet. So I guess that's the good news. Okay, now on to the bad news as we start to evaluate what's going to happen economically. We've done some preliminary work in terms of our crop production budgets and tried to evaluate how they're going to differ in this, if we do get this dry spell in this early part of June and we're able to plant. We have put together a decision aid that's an Excel spreadsheet that evaluates returns above variable costs for corn, soybeans, and then comparing that to preventive planting type of a payment. So that's the analysis that I think most producers, and I know that Representative Peterson mentioned this, that producers are doing this on a daily basis, looking at what's going on in the markets, corn, soybean prices, and how they're fluctuating, and trying to evaluate what is my best decision. I talked to a good producer yesterday, a good friend of mine, that indicated that his decision was going to be fairly easy as far as an economic decision come June 5th if he's not having all of his corn acres planted, and he was going to definitely take a preventative planting if he was just looking strictly at the base economics, because it played out for him that was going to be the best decision. Now there's several other factors that are going to come into that, and some of those he was trying to evaluate, and I'll go through those here in just a moment. But as I mentioned earlier, the decision aid, that's an Excel spreadsheet producers can download, evaluates returns above variable costs for those crops. And also we put up some additional enterprise budgets that at least take a stab at what's going to happen with corn and soybeans if we do plant those in this next week. And it's going to take a look at some of the yield decreases that our agronomists are saying historically have occurred. And that may not happen. You may have, as was mentioned earlier, on a field-by-field basis and with newer genetics, we may have better prospects for these late plantings than what we're used to. So as we evaluate those, we've got some late planting budgets on our website that you can download and take a look at. Those will enable you to put your own numbers in and try to do some evaluation on corn versus soybeans versus preventive plantings. Now, a couple of things that our decision aid, that's also an Excel spreadsheet, does not necessarily take into account, different pros and cons of preventive plantings. one of the things as we start to make assumptions and evaluate what's going to happen here on out, the big question mark is prices. You know, if we do have a significant acreage, not only here but across the Midwest that is prevented from planting, what will that do to crop prices? And I think we're all keenly aware that there's some upside there on corn and soybeans. And what do we plug into that as we start to evaluate whether to continue to plant corn past the June 5th date if that's in our consideration, or switch to soybeans, or take that prevented planting. So that's going to be a very difficult thing to plug in to our analysis, and you know, the best thing that we can do right now is take our Chicago Board of Trade or Mercantile Exchange or price and take some basis off and plug that in. You know, you may put some number in that's higher than that, but there are some other issues. Another pro to prevented planting might be a fallow year. I talked to Peter earlier. What is the value of letting land lay fallow for a year? I'm not sure what that is exactly. And another thing with prevented planting, if we do have a less than normal year in terms of yield for corn and soybeans, is that we don't have to plug that into our crop production history for crop insurance. So that's one thing producers are looking at as well. Now, on the other side, some cons, there are crop needs. Many producers need livestock feed. Some need to fulfill some obligations with contracts that they already have in place with terminals and other local elevators. And the one thing that it's hard to value is what's the impact going to be to agribusinesses and local communities. With less gross dollars to spend, these farmers may not be buying as much machinery. They may be sending back seed, chemical, or storing that for next year. So there are some repercussions beyond just the farmer level.
That's Barry Ward, agricultural economist with The Ohio State University. I'm Ty Higgins for the Ohio AgNet.